What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and we are back again for another Pauper video. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the best decks being played in Pauper right now. All the decks that we are going to be looking at are ones that had gotten first place in an in-person tournament. So these are all decks that are currently being played in paper, and as you know, that is something I'm definitely focused on in my channel is paper play. And I gotta tell you, some of these decks are kind of spicy. There is one list that we are going to be taking a look at today that is a take on a very familiar archetype based on a certain card that has kind of defined the format as of late. And I'm very excited to talk about that deck with you guys. As always, if you want to support the channel, if you could leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at the best decks in Pauper. All right, and the first deck we're looking at today is Izzet Control by Michael G. So this deck is basically a Tolarian Terror deck, uh, running a lots of Snowland. So there, it's probably Scred. Yeah, it looks like it is. Izzet Scred. So in the creatures, we got 4 copies of Augur of Bolas, 2 copies of Crimson Commodore, 3 copies of Murmuring Mystic, and 4 copies of Tolarian Terror. So they're just running the Terrors. I have seen some lists also running Cryptic Serpents, but they seem to be just going for more value plays with their Murmuring Mystic and Crimson Fleet Commodore with their creatures, and obviously Augur of Bolas is just a really efficient card. Okay, in their sorceries, they got 3 copies of Lorien Revealed and 4 copies of Ponder. And in the instant pile, we got 4 copies of Accumulated Knowledge, 2 copies of Brainstorm, 1 Breath Weapon, 4 Counterspells, 1 Dispel in the main. That is pretty interesting. Um, 1 copy of Fiery Cannonade, 3 Lightning Bolts, 4 copies of Scred, and 2 copies of Spell Pierce. They're run on an 18 land build with 1 Ash Barrens, 1 Maestro's Theater, 10 snow covered islands, 2 snow covered mountains, and 4 volatile fjords. Alright, so they're maxing out their Snowlands for Scred, which is a very efficient removal spell in red. All right, and then in the sideboard they got 2 copies of Campfire. That is pretty spicy. I haven't really seen that much in the sideboards for Scred in the past, but that is pretty cool. We got 2 copies of Cast into the Fire. This card is basically replace another card that I'm kind of blanking on the name that I believe Screddy used to run in the sideboard, but Casting the Fire, since it has 2 modes, is much better. Then we got 2 copies of Curfew. This is a great spell if you are going up against Boggles a lot, since you can basically get rid of their creatures, but that's about one of the main uses I see for it. They must have been seeing lots of that wherever they were playing. And then I got they got 2 copies of Gorilla Shaman, 2 Hydroblasts, and 3 Pyroblasts. Seeing less Hydroblast in here is interesting. I've usually Generally, in the past, I've often seen like 3 to 4 either Blue Blast or Hydro Blast in lists, but so it's interesting they're only running 2. I guess they already run a ton of counter spells anyways, so maybe that's not very, like, it's not necessary to run more, and especially since Swift Spear is now gone, maybe they have cut back on that. And then they got 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus. And this entire list looks like it's running around $129 as of recording this video, which is a little bit up there for a popper deck, but this, lot of the cost in this deck is definitely going to be in your relics, in the Hydroblast and the Pyroblast, as well as the mana base, but the rest of the deck is probably outside of maybe these AKs. Yeah, these, no, not the AKs. I think what is expensive here? Is it Scred? Ah, yes, it's the wow. I did not realize Screds have gone up that much in price. Well, that is interesting. Okay, our next deck is a UB Control by Tanayoki Naoyuki. All right, and so this I believe is just a Tolarian Terror deck. Another one. This is the Dimir version, obviously. So let's take a look. We got 3 copies of Cryptic Serpent, uh, 2 Gurmag Anglers, and 4 Tolarian Terrors. So they're only running 9 creatures in this build. This build is a little bit spicy. It's a lot more spell heavy for sure. In the sorcery pile, they got 2 copies of Deep Analysis, 4 copies of Lorien Revealed. In their instant pile, they got 4 Brainstorm, 4 Cast Down, 4 Counterspell, 2 Dispels, 2 Mana Leaks, and this isn't something I've seen a lot in decks, but this is they're just dropping Spell Pierce, it looks like, in favor of Mana Leak, which is kind of interesting. Something I haven't seen before. But that is pretty spicy indeed. Then they got 4 copies of Mental Note, 3 copies of Snuff Out, 4 Thought Scours, and they're running 3 Unexpected Fangs in the main board. And then in their mana base, they're on a 15 land build with 4 Contaminated Aquifers, 1 Ice Tunnel, and 10 Islands, which that has been pretty standard for Dimir Terror for a while. I have seen some lists that do go up to 16. I've been personally running mine at 15, and it has been feeling pretty smooth. Then we got in the sideboard 2 copies of Chainer's Edict, 3 Drown in Sorrow, 3 Hydroblast. They got another copy of Mana Leak. I kind of wonder if this is just this player's kind of pet card, but that is pretty interesting. And then we got 3 copies of Nihil Spellbomb. I guess they're taking this in to fight against the mirror match or other decks that play out of the yard. And they got 1 copy of Serpentine Curve. That is interesting. This isn't something I have seen. I mean, Serpentine Curve decks have kind of fallen off a little bit. Uh, but so I love to see this even in the sideboard because I do love this card very much. And they got 1 more copy of Unexpected Fangs. I'm guessing wherever this person plays, they're definitely seeing a bunch of red decks. I mean, they are running 1 less Snuff Out, and they are running 3 Unexpected Fangs in the main. So they are here to fight the red decks. They will not die to burn or fast aggro. Uh, but only running 9 creatures is pretty interesting. I usually have seen it, somewhere around 10 to 12. So they are running 1 less than I would say the average Dimir Serpents deck or Tolarian Terror deck that I have personally seen. But they are running all big boys, which I do like that. That's kind of what I've been doing myself, and it has felt pretty good. So overall, this deck is going around $117. Still around the higher side for pauper decks, but that is often what you tend to run into with competitive lists. All right, and our next deck is UB Clock Permission Deck by Kumagai Yuki. All right, so let's take a look what they got going on here. Looks like this is just Dimir Faeries. So we got 4 copies of Augur of Bolos again. So yeah, very good card. We got 3 copies of Fairy Seer, 1 copy of Gurmag Angler, 1 Murmuring Mystic, 3 Ninja of the Deep Hours, 4 Spell Stutter Sprites, and 2 copies of Thorn of the Black Rose. In their instant pile, they brought in 1 Arms of Hadar, 1 Chainer's Edict, 4 Lorien Revealed, and 3 copies of Preordain. In their instant pile, they got 1 Agony Warp, 3 Brainstorm, 2 Cast Down, 4 Counterspells, 4 copies of Snuff Out, and 1 Suffocating Fumes. And in their mana base, they're on an 18 land build with 1 Bajuka Bog, 4 Contaminated Aquifer, 1 Dimir Aqueduct, 10 islands, 1 Maestro's Theater, and 1 Swamp. In the sideboard, they brought another Agony Warp, Arms of Hadar, 3 Blue Elemental Blasts, 1 Chainer's Edict, 2 Dispels, 1 Hydroblast, 1 Okiba Gang Shinobi, 2 Relics of Progenitus, 1 Stormbound Geist, 1 Thorn of the Black Rose, and 1 Unexpected Fangs. So they are prepared here with their sideboard for a variety of matchups, and it's kind of interesting to see that a lot of competitive lists I have seen their sideboard seems to be more geared towards just general like MTG archetypes and bringing in like stuff versus control versus aggro or versus mirror type of stuff. Instead, this person is very much, it seems, they are prepared for a variety of things, which is kind of very interesting. It's also kind of another philosophy of how you can build your sideboard. I wouldn't say there is a right way in that regard, but it's really up to personal preference. That's kind of a neat thing to touch on. Obviously, this deck did get first place, so it's obviously a well-performing list. And if you want to buy this, looks like it's going around $121 at the moment. Say a huge chunk of that is just going to be the 4 snuff outs. The rest of the deck is probably pretty inexpensive, but yeah, that's the list. Next is kind of, I would say, the probably the spiciest list that we are going to be taking or a look at today, which is Boros Affinity by Martin Easy MTG. All right, so let's take a look at what they got going on. I have never actually seen a Boros Affinity deck in terms of any, especially all the glitters builds, which is that is what this is. So, well, mostly just seen Azorius, Esper, Jeskai, Orzhov, but it seems like any deck that wants to run white can run all the glitters and be good. This deck did get first place. So let's take a look at what they brought. They brought 4 Frogmites, 4 Glinthawk, 4 Core Skyfishers, 4 Mirror Enforcers, 3 Novice Inspectors, and 2 Thraben Inspectors. So they're just running five Inspectors, which is pretty interesting there. I have seen a lot of lists. Obviously, we covered a list on the channel that where we did an 8 inspector build, but maybe just 5 is enough. Obviously, this guy got first place, so that's something to take note of. They are on a 61 card build, so that is pretty cool as well. In their instance, they got 4 copies of Demand Answers, 4 copies of Galvanic Blast. Then their artifacts, they got 4 experimental synthesizers, 3 copies of Ichor Wellspring, and 4 Spring Leaf Drums. In their enchantments, they got 4 All That Glitters and 1 Makeshift Munition. This deck is really starting to look like Boros Synth and All That Glitters, taking the best part of both of those decks and turning it into one. So that is wild. Okay. And they're on a 16 land build. They got 4 Ancient Dens, 2 Dark Citadels, 4 Great Furnace, 1 Razor Tide Bridge, 4 Rustvale Bridge, and 1 Silver Bluff Bridge. They're not running blue, but this is just more artifacts in their mana base. Every single land in their mana base is an artifact, so they are trying to max out all that glitters as best they can, which is pretty cool. In their sideboard, they brought in 3 Blacksmith Skill, 2 Crimson Acolytes, 2 Dawnbringer Clerics, 2 Destroy Evil, 2 End the Festivities, 2 Obsidian Alkalites, and 2 Relic of Progenitus. So it definitely seems like they are very concerned about the mono red and probably the Dimir or Golgari matchups. since they have to worry about snuff outs and defiles and cast downs, all those sorts of things. So they are very much prepared for that, as well as being prepared for the red decks. All in all, this deck goes around $100 as of recording. So that is, I would say definitely a little bit on the higher end, but it is you do get a lot of the cost just in the mana base itself. The mana base for the deck is around $40, which compared to other formats is actually pretty cheap. But yeah, that is that list. So now we have another iteration of All That Glitters if we didn't need any more. Our next deck is Golgari Garden Deck by Talon Costa. All right, so this is just Golgari Gardens, obviously. So in their creature pile, they got the three Avenging Hunters, three Crypt Rats, two Thorn of the Black Rose, and two Trolls of Kaza Doom. In their instant pile, they got four Cast Down, four Deadly Dispute, four Defile, three Fanatical Offering, two Reckoner's Bargains, two Spinning Darkness, and one Suffocating Fumes. In their artifact pile, they got one Blood Fountain, four copies of Ichor Wellspring, and two Lembus. And then they got four copies of Tithing Blade. And they're doing a 19 land build here, which I think is maybe one less than what I have seen generally. Um, so that's kind of bizarre. I mean, they're running less trolls than I've often seen as well. So that's pretty spicy there. We got two Bajuka Bogs, one Golgari Rot Farm, four Colony Gardens, 10 Swamps, one Witch's Cottage, and one Woodland Chasm. So they are running, it looks like 12 swamps, which I think is probably going to be the bare minimum that you're going to want to have to make sure your defile is really hitting for a decent amount, since that is going to be dependent on how many swamps that you control. Thankfully, Witch's Cottage is typed as a swamp, and you can grab that with your troll. And then in the sideboard, they brought in the three copies of Drown in Sorrow, three Duress, two copies of Nihil Spellbomb, three Troublemaker Oath, and four copies of Weather the Storm. So yeah, for most part, this deck does seem pretty standards for a lot of garden decks that I have been looking at. I have seen sometimes people going heavier on the Lembus over Wellspring. I personally am a bigger fan of Wellspring since you can, get more value out of it with your Deadly Disputes, your Fanatical Offerings, your Reckoner's Bargains, etc. So it seems like this person is kind of on the same mindset and they did get first place, so it is definitely something to consider. This is probably one of our best budget decks that we are going to be looking at today. So right now this deck is only costing around $57, so pretty inexpensive if you are looking for a strong deck to start playing and you want to be competitive, but you don't want to maybe pay snuff out prices, or invest in a bunch of snowlands, which just the mana base themselves for, say, the Izzet Snow Control deck can be a significant cost to the deck. And our last deck today that we'll be looking at is Kuldotha Red by Kaneko Yuki. So it's no surprise that Mono Red is one of the best decks. It has been very, very good for a very long time. The banning of Swift Spear seems to have done very little to actually slow the deck down. And personally, I didn't think Swift Spear was as bad as everyone thought. I never really had much problems dealing with it. Sure, I died to it sometimes, but I'm not so sure it actually deserved a ban. Um, but that's just my opinion. Okay, but let's take a look at the deck. So we got four copies of Goblin Blast Runner, four Bushwhackers, four Goblin Tomb Raiders, and 4 Voldarian Epicures. So they have 16 creatures. This is seemingly starting to become the standard creature package for Kuldotha. In their sorcery pile, they got 4 copies of Chain Lightning, 2 Goblin Grenades, which I absolutely love seeing Goblin Grenades coming back into any sort of meta. And 4 copies of Kuldotha Rebirth, the namesake card of the deck. We have 4 copies of Reckless Impulse, so it looks like this one is going back to running impulses. I had seen some lists early on after the ban of Swift Spear that kind of just stopped running impulses, just it started running more creatures and just more burn spells. But it looks like this person's back on the Reckless Impulse plan. And then we got 4 copies of Lightning Bolt. So no Galvanic Blast here, which is kind of interesting. So I'm honestly surprised there are none, but I guess they want to maintain card advantage, so they're running the impulses instead, which is pretty interesting. Um, and then we got 4 copies of Experimental Synthesizer and 4 Implement of Combustion. This also lets us see more of the deck. So the running 4 of these and 4 of these is definitely a auto include in the deck, and yeah, so that's pretty standard. We got 4 Great Furnaces, 4 mountains. They're on an 18 land build. I have seen some lists going down to 17. This person is probably just trying to keep the deck as consistent as possible since they are running the Reckless Impulse. They do have some 2 drops, which if you're cutting Reckless Impulse and you are running Galvanic Blast instead, I think you can go down to 16 or 17 lands since all spells in your deck at that point are just going to cost 1 mana. But let's take a look at their sideboard. They're running 3 copies of End the Festivities, 2 Flaring Pains, 4 Pyroblasts. Does this deck need Pyroblasts? I don't think, since they don't have the Swift Spear anymore, this is just probably what they still had, but I think right now it is totally fine to run Red Elemental Blasts, since you're not running any prowess creatures, so which that is a kind of fun, sneaky thing to do with Pyroblast is to Pyroblast your own creature, just to watch the spell swizzle out, just to get 1 more damage through, but no prowess here, so that's it's just probably what they had from their older list if they were running it with Swift Spears in the past. And then we got 3 copies of Smash to Smithereens. I think this card is really good. I've been seeing a lot of decks run this. I have been kind of on Cast into the Fire instead, since it exiles artifacts. There's a lot I can do with that and deal with indestructible lands if I want. This is, I think, just fine. It also gets more damage through, which I think is a big thing for red deck. So if you're just trying to go as fast as hard as possible, Smash Smithereens is definitely the way to go. And right now, this deck is costing around $97, so still on the upper end of cost for pauper decks, but this is a very strong list. Well, a lot of the cost is going to be in your Great Furnaces and, some of the other, I think Reckless Impulses are kind of up there right now. But most of the deck is pretty cheap. I think you would save if you wanted to cut some costs running Red Elemental Blast instead if you wanted to start playing this deck, since you technically do not need the Pyroblasts at the moment, since you don't run, it's not running any prowess creatures or any creatures that would benefit from it. If you are on Pinger Burn instead for your red deck, I think you do want Pyroblast, but Red Elemental Blast would be fine here if you want to shave off a few dollars on the cost if you want to start playing this deck. But that is going to do it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed looking at these decks as much as I did. There's definitely some very interesting, very unique builds here, and they all got first place and in in-person tournament. So anyways, I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.